Oh, right. The Calling Home podcast. You know, we're getting close to episode 100.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, not of this TV run, but if you go back, because I mean, we started doing this in like 2015, I think. When we get to 100, I'll go back through the episodes and we'll do a quick retrospective or something. It's been a while, though. But in this TV version of the podcast, we had, it was like a pretty surprisingly delightful little journey into Petticoat Junction last week. Because we have some pretty serious ups and downs with this thing. Of like,
Yeah, but we were on a roll of a bunch of crap there for, it seemed like every week.
yeah,
What
and
thought would be good was pretty friggin' rotten.
like Petticoat Junction, like we were saying, it's not the same as Beverly Hillbillies and it's not as good, but it does have that, you know, it's just kind of like a pleasant show, like that we actually wanted to watch another one. You know, like that's pretty rare. That doesn't happen too often. It reminds me of there's this Japanese style of anime that started in the last, I don't know, 20 years, where it's like calming. Like if you've had a hard day at work, it's a deliberately low-key show with no real conflict that you watch just to help you wind down. And that is kind of the feeling I get from these rural shows of the CBS era. Like, it's just a nice vibe. It's just a nice place to visit.
Like I kind of mentioned that last week. You come home after your busy day at work and you just want to sit down and turn on the TV and not have anything that's really deep thinking or
Yeah.
stressful or whatever. And you see the nice girls and they're taking their petticoats off the side of the water tower, and you got the old Uncle Joe, and he's just so jovial and happy. And
it is like there is conflict.
lighthearted.
There was the thing happening with, you know, the bank people and stuff. And I guess in Beverly Hillbillies, it was like there's always the stress of, you know, Mr. Drysdale's always worried about something. But then the other characters just diffuse it by their relaxed country ways.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you can't fight through that. So this week we thought we'd finish the trilogy of shows. So it's Green Acres this week.
oh yeah, okay, yeah, we did say we'd look at Green Acres.
And it's nice, I was also saying last week how it's nice to watch these more famous shows because I can find like DVD sets and, you know, it's not just these weird, really bad quality, scratched up, low resolution videos. When these are good quality, it's just easier to watch them. It literally is more fun to watch shows when you're not struggling to watch the show, which obviously we went to extremes with the early BBC where that stuff was barely legible, but you know, just it was for just to check it out or whatever. But this one should also be DVD quality CBS show. You know, we're at the point where people cared and actually maintained these shows, which is nice. So Green Acres, the sister show to Petticoat Junction, ran from 1965 to 1971, starring Eddie Albert, and you had said...
Zsa Zsa Gabor.
Right, and I was like, oh yeah.
Is it Zsa or Eva Gabor?
Right, but that's the thing is I knew Zsa Zsa Gabor just from whatever. She was just a celebrity in the 80s. She was on Pee-wee's Playhouse and shit. But I didn't know there were other Gabors. But yeah, this is Eva Gabor.
This is Eva Gabor. Yeah, they were sisters. I think there were 3 sisters of the Gabor sisters. They were from Hungary.
Yeah.
And they came over here and became, Hollywood starlets.
Yeah, I was interested enough in it to try to find, you know, without doing massive amounts of research. I was just like, what is the story here? What happened? And there's no particular story. It's just this one, Eva's the youngest sister. She came over first from Hungary. And she married somebody rich, and she just worked her way into acting and stuff. Zsa Zsa, I guess, won some, like, you know, beauty contests and stuff, and she came over after, and she kind of became the most famous one, I'd say.
She was in movies.
Right. And then the third sister was the least famous of the 3, but same thing. She was the oldest sister. She just was like, well, I guess I will too. So she came over and also had a career. So, yeah, like there's no easy way to pin down, like, just seems so weird.
So when did they come over here? Like
pretty early, yeah. I don't
wonder,
have.
was it in the late 50s maybe when they?
I think way earlier than that.
Because there was a Hungarian Revolution in 1956, I think, when Hungary broke out of the communist realm that was established after World War II, and there were a lot of Hungarians, a lot of Hungarian refugees, who came to Canada, I know, and probably the United States. And yeah, it would be in 56, I think, was the revolution.
I'm afraid I didn't write this stuff down, but so I'm going to have to look it up. But She married Dr. Eric Drimmer, who she married in 1937 when she was 18 years old. So pretty early that she got her ass out of Hungary.
Okay. Yeah, before the war, before World War II.
But yeah, pretty interesting little family. And yeah, it's just like I only knew the one. So again, I'm learning stuff now. So this show had strong ratings, but it was canceled as part of the CBS Rural Purge we talked about last week, where viewers were rejecting rural-themed shows as they felt they were irrelevant to modern times. And Pat Buttram, who played Mr. Haney in Green Acres, his famous quote about it was, "CBS canceled everything with a tree in it, including Lassie," which was true. After like 17 years, Lassie got canceled as part of this. And not just the rural stuff. This feels like all of this type of TV we've been watching, like this is where it all comes to an end. Because variety shows from the 40s and 50s, like Jackie Gleason Show and Ed Sullivan Show, were canceled around this time. TV westerns were targeted for cancellation. Like all the stuff that we think of as early TV, if you had to pick a time that it was just getting swept away, it's the early 70s. They're just like, nuts to this. This is weird and irrelevant. We want urban shows.
Yeah, we want urban crap.
And like the fact that Petticoat Junction got replaced by Mary Tyler Moore is like such a perfect example of like, let's be clever, let's be young, let's be smart. Let's not be a bunch of fucking Jethros stumbling around, you know. As delightful as these shows are, it makes a certain kind of sense. Like at some point you got to pull the plug on what TV was and like upgrade to a new level of sophistication.
But you see, the Beverly Hillbillies crossed that line because they were urban centered.
Right. Yeah,
they
that's
were
true.
about country people, hillbilly type people, but they lived in an urban center.
Yeah.
And that was they crossed the line there.
And I guess this show, from what I understand, it really is the reverse, right? It's like city folk that move out to
the country.
Because, let's see, Green Acres started as a radio show called Granby's Green Acres that ran in 1950, only for 8 episodes. It was like a summer series that was just about the same premise. And it was, so that dude Paul Henning, who made Beverly Hillbillies and Petticoat Junction, was doing so well that basically the CBS gave him carte blanche. They're like, "Do you want to do a third show?" But he thought that was too much to handle. He didn't want to juggle a third show. So he didn't actually create this show. He executive produced it. But it was this dude, Jay Summers, who had done that radio show in 1950. He was like, "Hey, dude, why don't you take that and make it into a show?" And the same way Petticoat Junction was about Paul Henning's grandmother-in-law's stories, this Green Acres premise was based on Jay Summers' real childhood, where he had a stepfather who was obsessed with being a farmer and moved their family out to the farm, and the city kid suddenly had to start tilling fields and stuff, and he hated it. He's like, "This is the worst." But then when he grew up, he made it into this show about these city slickers, because I kind of got the sense from when I was reading that his stepdad was not great at this. He wasn't a farmer, but he just had it in his head that he wanted to be a farmer. And then the last little bit of trivia was that the theme song was written by Vic Mizzy, who wrote the Addams Family theme song, which, I mean, that's like one of the most famous theme songs ever. I mean,
Hey, Green Acres is the place for me.
right, so, I mean, I've heard Green Acres, but Addams Family, you know, like, now that's famous.
Hey, kind of similar, right?
Yeah. And Green Acres is also the first time that a show's cast performed the theme song. So there we go. That's what I know about Green Acres. So since Petticoat Junction went so well and we actually enjoyed watching more than one, I got the very first episode of Green Acres, but then I noticed that the first episode of season 2 references Hooterville in the title.
Okay.
So I was like, well, let's watch that one too and just see how it connects to
And
Petticoat
they're
Junction.
half-hour shows,
Yeah.
aren't they? Yeah, I thought they were.
This is,
Let's
I
check
mean,
her out.
probably, at least for the time being, I mean, this is probably the farthest, the deepest in we're going to go, you know, like this is mid-60s, but just the fact that TV shows are quickly turning color and all that stuff I was saying, like it was the end of the variety show, the end of the Western, the end of the rural shows, like the whole kind of purview of what we've been doing with this podcast. This is the end. This is the end of it. I'm not saying we can't go further. Oh, this might even be in color. That's surprising. I thought it would be black and white. But yeah, everything's coming to a close. Yeah, look at that color. Shit. We really are getting into the future.
Don't you worry, Mrs. Douglas. He'll come down all right. He's all right.
Thank goodness.
Oh, when you find your husband, tell him he owes me $12 for the open parachute.
Well, that's a very weird show.
Yeah.
I didn't like it, but there's things about it. Well, I guess basically, first off, I'd say you can really tell that it's not the Paul Henning guy who did the other two shows. Because this Jay Summers guy it's just not the same sense of like cleverness or like, because the other shows, it's like about these kind of slow-witted country people, but you can tell the writers are not that way. They're, snappy and come up with clever stuff. Where this is weird, where it's supposed to be about these urbane, fancy pants country people, and the dude in particular, what a blowhard, what a boring character. His literal only, like, if you had to write a biography about this guy, he's obsessed with being a farmer, full stop. That's it. That's the only thing about him. So, I mean, the first episode in particular was pretty brutal because it was like just an unnecessary level of setup. It took the whole half hour to get these country folk into.
Yeah, and there was really no plot tied in. They should have had a farm type story that would finish that off, and not just arriving and seeing a dilapidated farmhouse.
And it's funny too that his whole character is that he was born on a farm and he misses farms. He doesn't like the city. But they spent that whole first episode like deconstructing their own premise. The wife is like, this is stupid, it makes no sense. His mom shows up and is like, you were only there for 2 days, this is stupid, it makes no sense. But it's not like a charming affectation. It's not funny. It's just boneheaded and annoying. Like, can you imagine being married to this fucking guy with his stupid bullshit about I would just divorce his ass and get out of there. But I guess what I potentially could see being good about it, what I did like about it, once we jumped ahead to season 2, like, it's the weird flights of fancy were unexpected. Like, when they show how these two people met, how he met his beautiful Hungarian wife, it's because it was World War II, and he bailed out of his plane, and he gets found when he parachutes into a tree by Eva Gabor, and her whole thing is that she's all beautiful and dolled up while she's part of the Hungarian resistance because she uses her beauty as a booby trap to confuse German tank soldiers so they can blow up their tanks, and the tank is a literal toy tank that they drove, and like that stuff I could see potential there. Like, okay, if they do that a lot, like that's unusual for TV. We haven't seen that in earlier TV. Like the creativity of it, the weird, like let's just go off on a tangent and do this bizarre thing, but it wasn't funny.
No, it dragged. it dragged too much.
Yeah.
The writing is poor. It needed to be more tightened up and moving faster and not repeating that same old farm story again and again and again.
Especially, like, I was kind of giving them half a pass on episode 1, but when we jump ahead to season 2, it's been a whole year and nothing is developed. He still wears his suit every day. He's still telling everyone that'll listen how much he loves corn, growing corn. And and just like a little thing, but it's just weird, is like, it was funny in the first episode when they finally show up at the farm, because he's quite well-to-do and all their Manhattan apartments were nice. You think it would be like the Petticoat Junction place, like a well-to-do country place, but it's just shit. But by season 2, it's still just shit.
Yeah, their fence is still broken down as they drive off in their big Cadillac to go to the community, to the store.
The shutters still hanging off.
Still hanging off.
These cupboards haven't been painted. It reminds me of there's these video games called Fallout that are about like there was a nuclear apocalypse, and then, this is like 100 years later. What is the world like? So, it's like Mad Max, everyone fighting for bullets or whatever. But it's been 100 years and all of the buildings still look like that Green Acres place. And that always rubbed me the wrong way, because it's like, that would make sense if the apocalypse just happened. They've had 100 years. There's no reason why you can't tidy up. The apocalypse doesn't make the world apocalyptic forever.
Well, and you would do little things like, first things you do, paint the place, make sure the doors close, put the shutters in place. I mean, you don't have to make it into a fancy-dancy farmhouse, but you would do a few little cosmetic things
Particularly,
to that farmhouse.
And with this fastidious, debutante sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Socialite wife. Like, she's still wearing fancy dresses and stuff. She would have that place whipped into shape.
If they, as part of their dialogue, had some explanation about that, like that he was so into farming, like he just didn't have time, or out there in the willywags, you couldn't get the supplies. But they didn't go into that at all. It was really boring. It was the same theme that was in the first show, which is regurgitated in the second show.
Yeah, it's like this basic premise. I did expect it to be a lot more delightful based on
I did too.
Beverly Hillbillies and based on Petticoat Junction. Yeah, it just seems like the guy behind this show, he just didn't have the spark.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like, this is like when you think of that idea of the CBS rural purge, makes a lot more sense in this case. Like, I'm sure they would watch this show and be like, what the fuck is this show? Get this shit off our network.
Like, they had a little premise, but they didn't have any good writing to go with it.
Yeah, or they have this problem with the crops, right? So they got to go talk to the crop expert, and the joke is that he says every obvious joke and every boorish thing, and everyone rolls their eyes. But then they do that 8 or 10 times, and it wasn't funny the first time. Like, the joke is that it's not funny, but then no one else is funny either. So how is this guy any different from anyone else? It's just, definitely not very good. And I guess, I liked the weird flashbacks, and just I guess I like that the format of TV is opening up. Like the fact that they talk directly to the camera, and like they're making self-referential jokes, and like it's getting weird. It's not good, but it could be good. You could see how that aspect.
If you had some decent writing,
Yeah.
then it could be okay. But it's pretty flat.
Yeah. And definitely it's funny that this is, like the third show, and it's especially connected to Petticoat Junction. It takes place in Hooterville, and like there's characters that we've seen in Petticoat Junction. But I would say Petticoat Junction and Beverly Hillbillies connect up. But the fact that this show was made by a different guy, despite being connected, it doesn't feel connected. Like, no. I just, And it was neat, though, to see the dude, Mr. Haney or whatever. I think he's the guy who made that quote I said earlier about how they canceled everything, including Lassie. But as soon as I heard his voice, I'm going to include a little in the podcast, he's like the Sheriff of Nottingham from the Disney Robin Hood show. And it was neat to see that guy, because I know his voice so well from old Disney cartoons, where he's like, it's hard to do. It's like, it's just his natural voice, but his voice cracks where it's like, and Sheriff, and whatever. And it's like, oh, that's that cartoon guy. Because that happens once in a while where you'll hear old Disney voices. They're very distinctive. So that was neat, just to see that guy. But yeah, definitely quite a bust on that one. It's like, I really can't imagine it getting much better. I wouldn't give it another try.
I wouldn't either. I'm surprised it lasted as many years as it did.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it really was just like Paul Henning was running so high that it just like all of his stuff. But yeah, this one was the one step too far. Like, it's I can understand why he didn't think he could run 3 shows by himself, and he brought in someone else, but he brought in the wrong guy. Like, this is lame. And like, even that, like, I kind of got the sense maybe Eva Gabor could be funny. Like, there's little bits that were funny, and like, especially when she was being this weird resistance fighter and stuff. It's like, I feel so much potential going on here, but yeah, it's all just falling flat on its face. So I'll stick with the other two.
They could have even had her like more of the need to get out of that life and back to New York, and they didn't do that in
Yeah.
this. But that could have. It was just poor writing. It was dull. I was sitting there yawning and ready to fall asleep.
Yeah, I was gonna say too. Like, yeah, as one-dimensional as he is, so is she. Yeah, like she's just like she put up a little fight, but now she's just the good-natured wife.
Yeah.
Just like, oh, very good, darling. We'll just do whatever you like, you know. And yeah, just I don't know, what a dumb. I just can't get over that it's been a year and their
There's no
shutters are still
conflict
falling
in
down.
it. And to have most successful shows, there has to be some conflict, some arguing, some misunderstanding, and then ultimately a resolution at the end. But there really wasn't
Yeah.
in this. It was almost like we were still at the point of introducing all these characters to us. It was just very flat, poor writing.
Yep. So anyway, yeah, I don't know how even to fucking wrap that up. Just
Well, we don't recommend it.
you win some, you lose some. Last week went well. This week did not.